This one's interesting. This is one from, this is John Folsberg Lyon, so this is from Carrie Holland's, probably one of her grandsons. He him and his brother found this cave up in Ogden. It's called the Neff Cave, and at the time, it was and still is one of the deepest caves in the nation, in the world. I think it's like the 15th deepest cave. Very difficult to get into. So, but they would go there often to look, to explore that. And one time, he and another person went there, and they got stuck in a cave. So there was a 1,500-foot vault, and the people they were in there for 2 to 3 days to being rescued. This whole article talks about, but the first part of the five that were dispatched to cave entrance carried 500 feet of rope weighing more than 75 pounds. This length of rope soon ran out as the rescuers called through the cave, and a request for more rope was flashed back. Horses loaded with another 700 feet were then sent up to the canyon. There's a part in it, the tired youth made repeated attempts to scale a 150-yard cliff inside the cave and to get for their freedom. Anyway, so it was quite the ordeal, but they were rescued. They said they were immersed for 3 days. They took turns crouching on the ground as the other boys huddled over them to share their body heat. The exuberance so palpable the morning must have been smothered by the cold and clammy blackness that enveloped them. As they were about to give up hope of ever being found, a team of rescuers came, led by Jamie, his brother. They didn't tell anybody where they went, but his brother thought where they was. Who didn't go to the cave with the other boys. He was the only person who might know where they might be. Anyway, the cave has a vertical depth of 1,186 feet. It's the 5th deepest cave discovered in the United States. It's got a fence around it now. John Lyon would still give tours to people there. They let certain people, professionals, go down into it because it's so dangerous. But that's up in the, if I remember right, it's not too far from Salt Lake, maybe 14 miles or so from downtown Salt Lake. Another story. This is Christina Hutchinson, who is Janet's daughter, Janet Crookston Hutchinson's daughter, and she and her husband had these 3 boys, and here's their tale. Winter quarters in Utah, which is 8,000 feet up, is a mining area. It was called Winter's Quarters because there was a time when there was so much snow they couldn't get in there for, through the winter time, so they just call it Winter Quarters. There was an explosion there. Here it says it has, when it was first announced, as many as 150 to 200 died. I think there was actually 200 people that did die in that. So all 3 of the boys were in that cave, and all 3 died. These are their 3 oldest boys, and that's their headstones. I'll lie just all in order. It kind of just explains that. But just real sad. The oldest one was married, had a child, and so he's killed, and his wife's father was also killed. So his wife became fatherless and husbandless and raised the one son, and that's quite a story there. And then the middle one was not married, and he died, and the youngest one had just been married like 6 months. Anyway, here's another story, Molly Anderson, also about just the hardships that go on. So she was left with 6 small children. Another son, Carl, was born soon after her husband's accidental death while he was working at a sugar factory in Salt Lake City, finding out there were sugar factories all throughout Utah and Idaho. Aunt Molly worked hard to support her family. She took in washings, went into homes to help deliver babies and care for the sick. She would go to help deliver babies and be gone sometimes more than one day. Her children were left to take care of themselves. It was extremely hard for widows to find work just because women did not have the opportunities that men did. Her oldest son, Vernon, died with diphtheria, and another son, Clyde, was killed when changing a light bulb during a lightning storm. Then a few years later, her son, Carl, died of a heart attack, of a heart ailment. In 1950, Molly traveled to Canada with her sister, Aunt Ned, or Janet Anderson Brown, to visit their brother, Alexander. His wife had died, leaving him with 10 children to raise. So they took clothes for the children. The youngest child, Glenn, was only 6 months old. So Molly brought him home back to American Fork and raised him for 12 years after his death. At the time he went back to live with his father and helped their great grandsons. Quite the story. Here's a fun story, and I don't want to miss any of it. Keen Palmer tells about his father, and this is from Janet Crookston's line. So, my dad had a raven for a pet when he was a teenager. This bird learned a number of things, some good and some bad. I got this account from my mother, so it is secondhand. The bird learned to talk or mimic other voices. It could mimic Dad in calling the dog. It would have fun by calling the dog and then flying to the other side of the house and call the dog again, and would keep this up for a while. At least the bird and the dog got some exercise. It also learned to call Dad using the voice of Arch Peterson. Arch would come down the street to get Dad to go to school or somewhere, and would call, "Hey, Keno," instead of coming on all the way to the door and knocking. Well, this bird learned to call Dad by yelling, "Hey, Keno," and a number of times, of course, Dad would come out to meet Arch and would only find the bird. This bird also learned how to use its beak to let the air out of the tires on the old Model A Ford. It also learned to get into the car and honk the horn until someone came out and made it stop. It also learned how to strike the old wooden matches and throw them as it did. It started several small fires while in the backseat of the car, so they had to make sure it couldn't get a hold of any more matches. It would whistle a cat call to the young girls that walked by on the sidewalk, embarrassing Dad and friends. What a hilarious story. You know that we just read about somebody dying from lightning strike. The odds that somebody was struck by lightning in the U.S. during one lifetime is 1 out of 15,000. This book only has 8,000 people in it, and there's already more than one lightning strike. Here's another one. To advise this route here, 2 persons meet death at Hiram. Mrs. Henry Ames, which is David's wife's sister. Mrs. Ames was seated near the electric light drop when a bolt struck the house, descending the wire and shattering the globe and instantly calling her. So a lot of the lights were hung down from the ceiling. Her sister at the time was ironing in the kitchen, and the shock threw her against the stove, severely burned her. So my great-grandfather David and his wife wrote the following. Shortly after this, mother's sister, Annie Imes, died. So when she was struck by lightning, she was holding her baby in her arm. The baby seemed all right. So David and his wife took David and Millie Crookston took them in and did all they could, but he didn't do very well and died a few months later. The lightning seemed to affect him. And here is a crazy story on lightning. This is, I can't remember who this was, but when I was about 6 years old, I fed the chickens and pigs, and then had to get the coal and wood and the kindling. A lot of jobs for young children. I chopped my thumb on the chopping block with the axe when I was 7 years old, chopping a piece of wood in two. I worked nearly all my life from the time I was about 6 years old. About then, I had to start milking cows. We had one cow that was an old Guernsey cow. She was going dry, and so I stripped her out at night. We didn't milk her in the morning. One night, I was sitting there milking her, and it was thundering, and lightning came down and hit the bucket in between my legs. It threw the bucket away from the cow a little bit, and the cow took off. I went down in the corral where Dad was feeding the cows. He jumped over the fence, came over, and picked me up. I was pretty scared, but it didn't hurt me any. The milk was all gone from the bucket. It had just bent the bucket in two. It seemed like it had just crushed it. So here's the story talking about digging wells. So Robert Crookston dug wells before they went across the plains. They were told to get 18 months worth of food and clothing to cross them. So he worked for 3 to 4 years, him and John Welch, and both their families would go down in Missouri, and they would dig wells. And as I always wondered how Robert Crookston became a stonemason, but I think it's from these digging these wells that they would put stone. They would put stone around them as they dig through. So from what I read, you dig down about 10 feet, and then you brick or stone around the inside the well, so you could go another 10 feet. And I never thought of how dangerous it was until I started reading this, and a lot of the wells that Robert dug, he said some were about 40 feet deep. So these people were talking about a 100-foot well. They had dug down 90 feet, were about to give up, and then they finally hit water at 100 feet. And it says it took just 100 feet of rope to go up over the pulley and tied to the bell and hit the bottom of the well. The well, upon completion, was 90 feet deep, dug through hard clay soil without any sidewall reinforcements. What a dangerous undertaking. At the time, the sides could have caved in and buried alive whoever was down there. One time when Father and Ivan were out there, some of the sides had caved in, and Father lured Ivan down the bucket to clean it out. Ivan told me one time that from down there looking up the top of the hole didn't look much bigger than the shotgun barrel, and how frightened he was. Needless to say, Father got a real Scotch blessing from Grandpa when he found out what they had done. So can you imagine 90 feet down, you look up there and you just see this small hole, and that's the opening of the well. Very scary job. But that's what Robert and John Welch did that for 3 or 4 years there. And then Robert dug wells other places. He went down, I think when he went down to Payson, he was going down there to dig wells and rock them up. Here's a description of what during World War II, cash was hard to come by in those Depression years. Nita's mother, Blanche, kept a record in which she recorded spending $15 one month to feed her household of over 10 people. Boarders came to live in the basement and sometimes paid the rent with bottled fruit. Nita did a lot of babysitting for the going rate of 10 cents an hour. Babysitters were expected to wash the dishes, clean the house, entertain the children. Her earnings enabled her to go to the movies on Saturday. Admission was 10 cents. So she got paid 10 cents an hour. And had to do all that. Anyway, she talks about during World War II getting married, and they were in Fort Stevens, Oregon. So just after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and apparently there was some bombing that went into this fort. And anyway, Nita and John decided to get married quickly and set July 18th for the day. The commander's wife gave a tea party the day before the wedding for the visiting family. A captain's wife furnished a long white veil. She had worn a cathedral wedding, and a gardenia corsage was purchased in Astoria. I think she made her wedding dress out of a parachute material or something. Anyway, they had one. He got leave for 24 hours for their honeymoon, but the war scared him so much with him being in it and being so intense that they say they better get married. And I think a lot of people got married not knowing whether their spouse would come back or not from the war. Here's another description of what housing was. My parents lived in a small 2-room home. Now they say 2 rooms, not 2 bedrooms, just 2 rooms, located about a mile east of the small town of Fairview. He had 4 older sisters, 2 younger brothers. Family property consisted of about 10 acres, part of which Father purchased a couple of years ago. And he goes on and just tells more about the house. This is not his house, but that's kind of what the houses could have looked like back then. But he did say that in his 14th year, I did all types of farm work: hay, grain, chickens, about 5,000 chickens, turkeys, cows, horses, and irrigation. This is kind of interesting. The days were long, and sometimes irrigation went all night. So you had to be up at night to irrigate. We sometimes would start the water at the top of the field, then go down the bottom and lie down with our hands in the furrow and take a nap. When the water hit our head, we would wake us up and we'd go to the head and change it. My wage was $15 a month. The house was crowded, and when summer came, we moved the beds out under the orchard under a big early harvest apple tree. Big problem was to get them covered with a tarp when it rained. We had no appliances such. The fresh stuff was kept in a burlap covered cooler under a couple of large pear trees. It was cooled by the burlap siphoning water out of a container on top. The evaporation of the water cooled the unit. We also lowered a bucket down in the open well with such stuff as milk, butter, and eggs in it. So the days before refrigeration.